choir, and I proudly serve All Souls Community Church of West Michigan. And I and part of my congregation is here with you this morning, and we are thrilled to be here. And may I say, we were thrilled to have you last week, some of the members of the choir with us last week. It was a fabulous service, and now we've set the bar high in our minds, so we have to deliver, folks. I also want to thank you. I want to thank the Stephen. I know that last week was the anniversary of you hosting so many marriages for equality, and it meant the world to me and many UUs that you did this on behalf of so many UUs who are looking for, and the LGBT community that are looking to be treated equally in this space. So thank you for all that you did to make that happen. The call to worship this morning is part of the piece I heard when I was down in Selma, and it was read by the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed. I do not wish to breathe another breath if I do not have the opportunity to share it with others. The breath of life is not mine alone. I have brought myself here to be with you, hoping that inhaling the compassion and the courage and the hope found here, I can exhale the fear, the selfishness, and the separateness I keep so close to my skin. I cannot live another moment, at least not one of joy, unless you and I find our oneness together, somewhere among each other, somewhere between the noise, somewhere in the silence of our next breath.
added three of the musicians that came along this morning. Welcome. And of course the combined choirs. We've had a wonderful time together in lifting our voices in this song and making this sanctuary resonate. So it's been a delightful time. I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning to our Unitarian Universalist congregation. Ours is a liberal tradition, respecting the dignity and worth of each individual and working towards social justice in the world. I extend a special greeting to other visitors as well. If you have not done so already, we ask you to sign the visitor's book located at the table inside the entrance, and you are also invited to take visitors back at home with you. And please join us after the service for coffee and snacks and conversation. Announcements are printed in your weekly order of service. I want to call attention to a new one. One of my favorite performers on the back of Jack Williams' concert. It's going to be here on Sunday, April 19th. Jack is the kind of guy who makes me want to put my guitar away after just a tremendous musician, been nationally touring for about 40 years. So we're not going to charge a set admission price, but we're asking for a donation that day to pay for his presence. So if you need to see me for more details, I have them. We've got some birthdays to look at this week. Jennifer Braden on the 28th, which was yesterday. Carolyn Holmes is on April 1st. And Joshua Ellenbrady has a birthday on April 1st. Is that correct, Joshua, or is that an April Fool's thing? Barb Khan is coming up as well. So we wish them happy birthdays. For those restless children or adults who may become uncomfortable, there's a comfort corner in the social hall where you can listen. Feel free to use it if needed. If you have an electronic device, we would ask that you silence it now. This would be a good time. And if you look at next week is a Passover program in Deborah Markey's presentation. I think Bruce Freilich has a real quick announcement.
Thank you. As Dave said, it's wonderful to hear this space resonate with such wonderful music. I'm treasurer of Harvard UU, and we're coming up on pledging, and from pledging, we'll be able to determine what we're able to do in the coming year in our time of transition. So I have gold slips here, and the idea is please go for the gold. See me for a pledge slip for the coming year, so that we can determine our budget and make our plans as a board. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And it's our tradition here, those of you from All Souls, to have what we call Mara's Moment. Mara Johnson was a long-time member here who used to embrace everyone every Sunday in a welcome way. So we ask you now to welcome one another with those seated around you.
As in your tradition, please join me in saying the chalice lighting found in your order of service. With humility, courage, we are called as Unitarian Universalists to build the love and unity where all souls are welcome as blessings, and the human family is the soul and reconciled. With this vision on our hearts and minds, we light our chalice. Now I believe we rise in body and in spirit, we will sing our first hymn this morning, number 153, Oh, I Woke Up This Morning. We're doing this in a arrangement by Jason Shelton, so if you go along a little faster than we might be used to, the notes and the music by the readers say the funkier the better. All right. We arrived in Birmingham, Alabama, and when we arrived, we went to what is called the Civil Rights Institute, and we took a cab there, and we did not realize it was on 16th Street. So we got out of the cab, and the first thing we saw was the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was really quite a moving moment. And then we turned around and we saw the memorial. And the memorial is an entire garden or park that talks about the history of Birmingham, Alabama, in the 1950s and 60s. So this is a bronze statue of the 4 girls. And you can see the 4 girls in the front here looking at the Birmingham Church. It's a very powerful juxtaposition. And then as you walk into the park, there's a statue of Martin Luther King. And then there is a tree, and the tree is dedicated by folks who are part of the Holocaust Memorial. Outside of Anne Frank's apartment, there was a horse chestnut tree. And so they harvested that tree, and they saved the chestnuts. The tree had come down a couple of years ago. And so they harvested some chestnuts of that tree, and then they dedicated to growing those trees and then putting them in places throughout the world. And here is one in Alabama. This is a picture of the water cannons, just to give you an idea. We arrived on a Wednesday, and on Thursday we went to the historic Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church in Selma, and we heard Dr. Bernice King speak, and we also heard William Barber speak, and both of them were phenomenal preachers. We also heard Jeremy Wright, and to have the 3 of them, Jeremy just honestly didn't deliver when with the other 2. So these are pictures of Selma. This was something as we drove by in the bus, I saw this, I took a picture, and it was saying, don't be a deadhead, anti-crime kind of statement. While we were marching on Sunday, this was very common to see families out on porches watching us march by. If you know your history about Selma, our history about Selma, this is the Walker Cafe where Clark Olson, Olaf Miller, and James Reed had dinner, and they walked out of the cafe. And then a few feet down the road is the marker for James Reed. And this is James Reed's children and his grandchildren who were all there for the Memorial Weekend. And then this is Brown Chapel, a very famous spot in the whole story. They have a statue of Martin Luther King, and the statue says, I had a dream, and at the time when they put it in, they felt very positive about it, but they want to redo it and say, I have a dream, back to the needing to have, not past tense, which I think is a very powerful statement. This is inside Brown Chapel. This is where Dr. King eulogized Reverend James Reed. There's 3 absolutely gorgeous stained glass windows, each one of them different, but each one of them depicting Jesus. And our fellow UUs from around the world, and more UUs, and young UUs, they do exist. And then I just felt like this guy was just a handsome officer, but also I thought it represented something important. He represented. And there I am with Reverend Peter Morales and my seminary buddy, the Reverend Evelyn Melcher. And then I saw people in other yellow shirts, so I took them because I felt kinship with them. And then this is us approaching the bridge. And this is us getting closer. And I explained last week that what happened was people got on the bridge and did not move. The idea was we were going to go across the bridge, but when people got on the bridge for the first time in their lives, they wanted to be on the bridge. So they did not move. So we had to wait for 70,000 people to decide. Whether it went to committee, I don't know. And we were waiting, because having more than 70,000 people on the bridge at any one time, if you saw the bridge, you'd know we would not want to test it. This picture I found really powerful. On one side it says, I am Viola Liezu, and on the other side it said, being brave. And I thought this is really interesting. The woman who's carrying the sign is a teenager, and she's a young African-American woman. And this is a memorial on the road from Selma to Montgomery. This is Viola's memorial. It is next to a church, and it is gated, and it has been gated because it has been vandalized so many times. While we were down in the conference, the Unitarian Universalists awarded their Courageous Love Award, and they awarded it to Jimmy Lee Jackson's sister, who's still alive. The Reverend James Reed, this is his widow, Marie, and his daughter and his grandson are in the back of the picture. And then, obviously, Viola's two daughters. And then I end this with this photograph of Rosa sat so that Martin could walk. Martin walked so Rock could run. Rock ran so all our children could walk. And I explained to the children last week that they did a picture of John Lewis in the front in a little black and white inset. And, at the time, John Lewis wasn't given the right to vote. And here he is, fighting the president as a congressman in our United States Congress. It just speaks for itself. And that is our current vote. So here is the time of your service when it is the offertory. And as I tell my congregation every week, all that we are and all that we ever hope to be come from the many ways we contribute to this congregation. There are many ways to contribute. This offertory is just one of the ways. The offering will now be given and graciously received.
Yeah.
Well, you're anyway, we've had a great time. Thanks for voting for arranging this with me, and Reverend Hallie for coming out. Thanks to all the musicians and the choir people. It's been a lot of fun.
Good. Reverend Colin Squire's wife, Dr. Linda Squires, accompanied her to visit Selma. And Linda shared her experiences with the congregation last week. Linda is back in Grand Rapids teaching a religious education class at the church. And so I am honored to read this in the first person in Linda's words. Selma. 3 weeks before I went to Selma, I flew to Denver to be with my sister while she was having surgery. I came back after 5 days and went back to work. I called my 93-year-old mother to see how she was, and she told me that a few days ago she had gotten up in the middle of the night and fell, hitting her back on the desk and in her bed. So she wasn't doing too well. When I called her again, her back was doing a little better, but she couldn't get out to lunch with the rest of the residents where she lived. I got off the phone and told Colleen, I'm going to see my mom before we go to Selma. I left on a Thursday afternoon before leaving for Selma and drove to my mother's in Ohio. Stayed for less than 24 hours. As a chiropractor, I fixed what I could and then drove back. By the time we left for Selma on Tuesday, driving in a snow and then ice storm, I had a cold. Thursday morning, we met our friends Emily and Anders and went to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. It is right across from the Baptist Church, which had been bombed and 4 little girls died. I am so grateful that I and all souls went as a group to the Jim Crow Museum at Ferris State University because it prepared me for what I saw and experienced. That afternoon, we went to Selma and saw where Reverend James Reed got attacked and Brown Chapel where he was eulogized by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Later, we went to the Baptist Tabernacle Church in Selma, where they had the first Mass voters meeting in Selma in 1965, and got to hear Reverend Bernice King, daughter of Dr. King, and Reverend William Barber, president of the NAACP in North Carolina. Reverend King talked about heaven being in the room in which people with lost spoons feed each other. And Reverend Barber, I would listen and follow Reverend Barber anywhere. He is that good. We got back to the hotel late, and by the next morning, my cold was gone. It was like I didn't have any time to have a cold. Wow. At the Unitarian Universalist Living Legacy Conference, we heard a panel of Unitarian Universalist people who were in Selma in 1965. We also had the great privilege of hearing Reverend Barber speak again. He talked about taking back your own state, and that we needed to get beyond labeling Democrats and Republicans. And he talked about what is the moral thing to do. The march in Selma was awesome. To be with other UUs and our standing on the side of love yellow shirts and walking with everyone else was great. The song sung during that time had such a deeper meaning, which I now understand. I came back a happier, better person who was grateful for my life and inspired to do something more here in Michigan. Why? I saw the poverty still there, the struggle, the suffering experienced back then, and now the setbacks we are currently dealing with around voting rights. Yet I saw that in 1965, people came together and made things better. Even when things are bad, people believe there can be heaven here on earth, and now I am one of them.
congregation to join me in going to see the film Selma. I think at our final count we had pretty close to 40 of us going to see the film that evening. And there were several of them who could not make it on that night, and so they went as well. So in all told, we were over 50 of us to show up to see the film Selma in January. When there's that high of a response, it shows engagement, it shows sincere interest, and it shows for care on the topic. It's also called showing up. And in life, it is important to show up. Now, when and where you show up is entirely up to you. But when and where you show up says a lot about what you truly care about. Earlier this week, one of my members of my congregation poignantly reminded me of the famous quote by George Bell. You can pretend to care, but you cannot pretend to show up. Even our president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, President Peter Morales, referred to that very same quote in his column for UU World magazine this month when he was speaking about Selma. He said, you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. Selma, and our history with Selma, is all about Unitarian Universalists showing up. And I did not get this, and I didn't get this at a core level, at a gut level, until I showed up in Selma 50 years later. We arrived in Birmingham, Alabama on a Wednesday afternoon, and the next day, about 250 Unitarian Universalists loaded onto 5 big buses. And we drove the 90 miles south to Selma. Now, I had no idea how remote Selma was. I had no idea how small a town Selma was until we started trying to make those tight turns on those giant buses. 250 people on 5 gleaming white buses does not go unnoticed in a town like Selma, no matter how significant your weekend is going to be. We were certainly noticed. Now, while we were on these buses and making these tight turns, I kept thinking about Dr. King. And I kept thinking to myself, he chose this place? This is the place where he chose to change history? This seemingly forgotten corner of the deep, deep South? This is where he was going to make a stand? This is quite fascinating a decision, I kept thinking. Selma could have easily flown under the radar, and probably had flown under the radar for many years. But everything was exactly right. Everything was exactly perfect for 50 years ago. It was a scalding crucible, ready to boil over. Now, on the day we arrived in Selma, it was absolutely freezing outside. It was unseasonable. It was a biting, painful cold. And as we drove on our buses and we drove past that famous bridge and we turned the corner, we were heading towards Walker's Cafe, the cafe that once served that faithful dinner to 3 Unitarian Universalist ministers. And not 50 feet past the door of Walker's Cafe was the marker honoring the life and the death of Reverend James Reed. We all got out of our warm buses and immediately we started snapping pictures of the marker. And then the adult children and the grandchildren of Reverend Reed stood for photographs for us. And then we gathered around them as if to give them some warmth. And they spoke to us about what this weekend meant to them. They talked about their father's decision to show up and how that decision to answer Dr. King's call changed their lives forever. They said that some of them had been back for other anniversaries, but this was the very first time their mother would be returning to Selma in 50 years. They spoke about how young they were when their father was killed, and they said the youngest was just turning 3, and the oldest had just turned 12. They said what they knew about their father is what they read about in books. And finally they said, oh, the UUs have always been very kind to us. In fact, some of us have even visited a UU church or two. Now, we were freezing by this point, so we got back on our warm buses, and we tried to shake off the shiver, and then we drove just a block around the corner, and we drove towards Brown Chapel. Now, we were told on the buses that they were going to let us out. We were going to be able to take as many pictures of Brown Chapel on the outside as possible, but nobody was going to be let in to the chapel on that day. So just a few of us got out, and I was the one elected from my group, and it was freezing. Now, a small group of us were standing in the driveway of Brown Chapel. The pastor of that church, Pastor Lettis Strong, was trying to back out of his driveway, and I can tell you could tell he was getting a little frustrated and a little overwhelmed, slightly annoyed at all the visitors. I'm sure there were so many visitors during the week. But at one point he got out of his pickup truck and he said to one of my friends, so what group are you here with anyway? And she said, oh, we're the Unitarian Universalists. The Unitarians, he said, let me get my keys. Let me let you into my church. I happened to be standing at the door when Pastor Strong came with the keys, and I said to him, thank you, sir. Thank you for letting us into your church. It is such a generous thing. And he said to me, you are the Unitarians. You are very special people to us. The Unitarians showed up. It's an honor to let you into my church. I am the one thanking you. Selma and our history with Selma is all about us showing up. And I did not realize that until I showed up for myself and on behalf of my congregation as well. And when we walked into Brown Chapel, I can tell you it was like walking on holy ground. This chapel is where the martyrs had gathered on what would become Bloody Sunday. And they were in the very pews where they had readied themselves, where they anticipated only brutality waiting for them on the other side of that bridge. And here they sat to ready themselves for that march. It is also the same chapel just a few days later where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King would eulogize the Reverend James Reed. It was there in that chapel where King rhetorically asked, who killed Jim Reed? And he answered, a few ignorant men. And then he asked, what killed James Reed? And he answered, an irrelevant church. A church that stands amid social evil. A church that serves as a taillight instead of a headlight. A church that is an echo rather than a voice. What killed James Reed is an indifferent clergy, an irresponsible political system, a corrupt law enforcement, a timid government, and an uncommitted Negro population. And his words still ring true today. Now, the chapel is certainly listed on the national and historical registers, but it is also one of those rare places in our history, in our emotional history, that we hold so close. It is one of those tender places where it holds deep meaning to so many of us, and just walking in and beholding the sight stirs your heart. And so as we walked in and we looked around, we took in the light, and we took in the stained glass windows. We all started to sit in the pews. A few of us were standing in the back, respectfully quiet. It was so quiet. We were just taking in the space and thinking about all of those people who had gone before us. And then from the silence, just a few of us started to sing an old gospel hymn, and all of us, we all just stood right up and we started singing this hymn together, woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. And it was soulful. And it was powerful. And it was moving. And we were being fed. We were being fed a taste of church we rarely understand. We were being fed the black church. And it is quite different from the church we understand. First, it is the music. It is always the music. It is the gospel music. Music we, I think, cannot simply understand because we haven't suffered enough. Enough to get it at a soul level. I hear you congregation, singing this little line of mine, and we sing it like it's a children's tune. We don't understand the words to be saying, no matter how much you oppress me, no matter how hard or how long you hold me down, no matter how deep or dark your evil is, my light is going to shine. I promise you, my light is going to shine. It's going to shine. That is where that song is sung from. You got to feel it. You got to feel it. And here in the Deep South, in Selma, Alabama, in the African American church, in the black church, in the brown chapel, are three gorgeous stained glass windows illuminating Jesus. And in the center of the sanctuary, there's this lit cross, gleaming cross, to praise Jesus. Here he is loved. He is understood as someone who understands suffering and oppression. Here he is understood as a good man and a faithful servant. He is understood as someone who has suffered brutality and has paid the ultimate price. And in the black church, Jesus is the one true light. Pure, unconditional love. Praise Jesus, praise Jesus. It's always praise Jesus. And most of us struggle with that. And finally, in the black church, there is only one place where white stayed out. And it was in the church. It made it a true sanctuary. A place where they gathered their strength and lifted up their community. And most importantly, it was a place free from their oppressor. That's why so many black ministers were the leaders of the civil rights movement. I mean, it makes sense now, right? And in the churches, that's where the movement began. It was Sunday afternoon after church service, they planned. They lifted themselves up and they formed this movement. And wherever we were in Alabama, we were either outside, on a bus, in a school cafeteria, or we were in a church. And everything about our schedule was about being in church. It took me showing up in Selma to understand that at a soul level. So why did we show up in Selma 50 years ago? Why? Why did we show up? Well, the Reverend Mark Morrison will say it was all about personal relationships. That's what made you ministers show up 50 years ago. He said that down in Boston, there were 5 Unitarian Universalist ministers who were around the Boston area who went to seminary with Dr. King at Boston University. It was their personal relationship. It was knowing their old friend Martin, and when Martin made the call for ministers to go to Selma, they went. Those 5 ministers then called their friends. They made the personal phone calls, and then they called their friends. That's why we showed up. Others came because they had personal relationships, real relationships, honest, true, authentic friendships with African Americans. And some made real connections because of the black community. The Reverend James Reed went because he lived in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and he served in Roxbury, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. The cause was for voting rights, but they went because of their relationships. That's why they went. They showed up because of their personal connections. Their personal relationships made them care enough to show up. So why did I show up? 50 years later, why did I go? I can tell you personally, I have always felt a connection to the Reverend James Reed because I served in Dorchester before I came here, and I served in the Roxbury community. And it has been my honor, and I have been humbled to follow in his footsteps, if only for a short time. And then I made a phone call to my seminary friend, Emily, and I said, "Are you going to Selma?" And by the time we hung up the phone, we were going to Selma. And then I asked my wife to go, because 50 years ago, it wasn't just UU ministers who went. It was congregants, too. So we went, and I wanted both of us to show up in Selma. So there we were, Sunday morning, standing outside of Brown Chapel, waiting for church to let out. They said it was going to be extremely long that day, and we had plenty of time to stand outside. And we were hearing Jesse Jackson preach. And as we were listening to the preachers, we took in Selma. And as I looked around, I saw utter poverty. Utter, unmistakable poverty. And I also witnessed the beloved community. All the residents of Selma were outside, and they knew each other, and they were talking to each other, and they were bonding with each other. And I noticed somber memorials, and I noticed spirited celebrations. There were roughly 450 Unitarian Universalists. Half of us were wearing our Sunday best, and the other half of us were wearing our sunshine yellow t-shirts. We walked with 70,000 others, and in that crowd of 70,000 others, most of them were people of color. Our Unitarian Universalist group was about the most white folk there. And as we walked by the residents who were sitting on their small front porches, and they saw our yellow t-shirts, they went, "Hey, the Unitarians. There are the Unitarians." This is called showing up. And in life, it is important to show up. When and where you show up is entirely up to you. But I will tell you this. When and where you show up says a lot about what you care about. You can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. Amen. Please rise in body and spirit and sing our closing hymn this morning, number 169, "We Shall Overcome." Go in peace and know you are loved. Amen. You guys, I'm going to let you out. Please join in saying with me what's found in the order of service. I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear rebellion and freedom, for the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that the peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail.
There's a place I